Yeah, hello everybody. Really happy to be able to speak to you today about UI sound design, a very specialist field of sound design which is very relevant to the technology of today. For these 20 minutes, I'm going to start by introducing you to some UI sound concepts. I'm then going to go on to kind of speak about the principles that you should follow for successful UI sound design. And then I'll finish by looking at the future of UI sound design, touching on a few trends, as well as looking at how companies can incorporate UI sound design into their processes. UI, of course, stands for user interface. So we're designing sounds as part of an interface. Sounds that can be used in tandem with visual feedback, which is quite common, or in tandem with haptic feedback, which is a little bit less common. Or UI sounds can be used on their own as the sole feedback within interface. Now, this is becoming increasingly common today as our technology becomes more advanced and strives to be less intrusive on our attention. It's also a recognition of a trend towards heads-up technology, which is encouraging people to move away from constantly staring down at a small computer screen. So UI sounds can be anything from an urgent notification alert, which demands our immediate attention. Should wake you up. One of the most extreme examples, of course, is a smoke alarm. Or we can have more of a subtle notification alert, which doesn't necessarily require our immediate attention. Oh, it's a little bit loud. Yeah, that's, of course, a call service sound in an aeroplane, which is a good example. It's quite appropriately calm for the situation. Or you can have a UI sound that simply reaffirms the action of a user, allowing you to focus on the job in hand, in this case, keeping your eyes on the road. A car indicator sound, of course. It's also common to have very small interaction or transition sounds as part of commonly as part of a touchscreen interface. Sounds that add a subtle UX layer or moment of delight to a UI interaction. So UI sounds are already, a common part of our everyday lives, of course, thanks to the mobile era. Can I just say that this is not the usual context for these sounds, so they might not, this is not how you'd normally hear them, obviously, so just take that into account. So obviously, this is where a lot of my experience comes from with UI sounds. At Nokia, one of my main responsibilities was in platform sound development. So this involved creating UI sounds alongside the development of completely new platforms, such as the Nokia MeeGo platform and the beautiful Nokia N9 device we see here. So each sound was vital to the user experience of a device and would be crafted to perfection. Everything from the default ringtone to camera shutter sound to the key click sound, to the most smallest of sounds. So we know how useful UI sounds are in providing information, simple, functional, and easy to understand feedback. But they're becoming increasingly important in today's modern tech world. Today, there has never been a more relevant time for specialized UI sound design. And I've no doubt that sound will play an increasingly important role in our everyday lives. As our product experiences become smarter, less attention demanding, and more holistically designed. Products of today also have a strong focus on design beyond simply the look and feel. It's considering the whole product experience. Design also includes sound, which I have to say is still often an undervalued and overlooked part of a design experience. Historically, far more focus has been given to the visuals, but with today's greater emphasis on design, and especially UX or user experience design, considered UI sound design has never been more important. Okay, on to principles for successful UI sound design. So we have design for speaker context, design holistically, don't over-design, design silence, and same design principles for all. So, design for speaker context. This is probably the most crucial consideration for anyone designing UI sounds. So more often than not, the UI sounds will be intended for a mobile or other small speaker device. Now, we know that small speakers have a limited bandwidth, and distortion can be an issue at certain frequencies. So, it's really the job of the sound designer to work around these restrictions. Now, through experience, you do gain a natural instinct as to what works and what doesn't with a small speaker, but not all small speakers are the same. That's why testing is absolutely crucial. Best advice is to simply, test that sound on the device it's intended for, and then continually iterate that sound until you, really hit that sweet spot between suitable audibility and pleasant sound. It's always a kind of a balance you're trying to find. Besides mobile speakers, there are, of course, other examples of different speaker contexts. Here we see some wireless bone-conducting headphones. So I created a UI sound set for a device such as this as part of the Microsoft Cities Unlocked Guide Dogs project. A very inspiring project that involved helping visually impaired people navigate independently, guided by binaural audio. So the sounds themselves would resonate against the bone just below your ears. So, even though you can work with a lot more bandwidth than, say, a mobile phone, there are other considerations you need to make, such as the ambient noise around you. So the UI sounds, they really need to cut through any background noise, especially important if you think it's, for the visually impaired, where sound is absolutely vital. Another example is the Microsoft Hololens. The speakers on these are, actually pretty big, pretty good. So you can, again, work with a lot more low-frequency content. If these kind of devices are pointing to the future, then it's really interesting to note that the UI sounds are part of your world only, speakers directed to your ears and not those around you. Next, design holistically. So when you design UI sounds, you are more often than not designing a set of different sounds matching up to specific functionalities. In this case, you really need to, think of the sounds holistically, reflecting the audio identity of a device as a coherent, close-knit family of sounds. Now, there may be wider brand considerations you need to make, but if we stick to a product focus, it's important to think about how all the sounds relate to each other. They should all kind of give the sense of being part of the same family, but be varied enough in their meaning to make sense to the user. Now, some sounds should have a very close relation to each other. For example, it's very common practice to have coherent UI sound pairings. Common examples can include like the listen and confirmation for Siri, or you can have on-off, connect and disconnect, or a lock and unlock pairing. Coherent pairings create easy to understand meanings for the user, as well as enhance the holistic design experience. So it's important to think of the sounds as a collection. As an example of this, I'd like to share some of the structured thinking that I did whilst I was working back at Nokia. So this pyramid you see here, this represents the audio identity for each device. At the top of the pyramid, we have the default ringtone, which is, of course, the Nokia Tune. Now, this is really, the most brand recognizable sound, and, really is the heart and soul of the audio identity for each device. And then below that, we'd have all the default alerts, like default message, calendar, email, and alarm clock. All these sounds would form what we call the core brand sounds. Sounds that should really strongly reflect the brand and design principles, often using similar textures and tonalities. With these sounds, you can really make a strong brand and design statement. And then we'd have all other sounds at the bottom of the pyramid, such as additional ringtones and alerts, and then all system UI sounds. With these sounds, there is more flexibility, allowing you to either further express the brand or focus solely on functionality. All sounds, however, should all still reflect the same brand and design principles. This thinking also drives a lot of the work we do at Oblique Sound. Of course, not every brand has a Nokia Tune there at the top, but this same principle can be applied to all products. For example, an Internet of Things device, you may have a startup sound there at the top, followed by an important notification alert, and then other more functional sounds below that. Next, don't over-design. So this again is a really crucial consideration for anyone designing UI sounds. I'd say it's a common principle in today's world, leading to sophisticated, refined, modern designs. UI sound design should certainly also reflect this. I'd say not over-designing is probably the most challenging factor for someone who's not used to designing UI sounds. It's quite easy to over-design a sound if you're used to working with far more extravagant sounds for different mediums, for bigger bandwidths. What you really need to do when designing UI sounds is keep in mind the user perspective at all times, and of course the function you are designing for. This is the most important thing. You really need to go as minimal as you can, which is actually a lot more challenging than it sounds. You can always find those small nuances, to create that finesse touch that you need. For example, blending textures or adding a subtle echo effect. Now, this is where the expertise of a UI sound designer is really key. Next, design silence. So as a UI sound designer, it's not always about adding sound. Yes, it's about creating those essential notification alerts that add true value to the user experience, the usability. It can also be about the subtle interaction sounds, such as a key click sound. For anywhere in between, there will be opportunities to explore, to see whether UI sound can really improve the UX. If that sound isn't working, either through your instincts or the UX designer instincts or through user testing, then simply remove that sound. Silence is golden. There is plenty of sound already out there, clamoring for our attention. We certainly shouldn't be adding sound for the sake of adding sound. It's also worth pointing out here that it should be possible for users to turn off UI sounds if they so wish. And in some cases, such as desktop websites, maybe the sound should be off by default. Next, same design principles for all. So, whatever you design, you're invariably designing an experience. And when we talk about design today, it's far more than how pretty or cool something looks. It's about how we interact with the product, it's about the usability, it's about how it makes us feel. Our sound can have a massive impact on all these aspects, so it's vital you pay attention to it and get it right. If you follow the same design principles for every facet of your design, then you'll stand a much better chance of ensuring a coherent brand message and clear design DNA. Okay, so the future of UI sound design. Firstly, I think this is already quite prevalent. We see a growing trend of mobile applications kind of sonifying their experiences with considered UI sound, having previously been mute or in some cases using library sounds without too much thought. A good example of this is with the Facebook mobile app. So historically, their mobile app experience had been completely silent, but fairly recently they introduced some subtle transition sounds, a few kind of clicks and pops here and there. Of course, when such a widely used app as Facebook decides to do something, others may well follow suit. Another recent example is from Tinder, who have also just sonified their app, including a sound for a match, a sound which also has the potential to become iconic. So apart from the smaller transition sounds, which are less chance of being brand recognizable, you can create potentially iconic sounds to highlight a key part of the user experience. Next, considered UI sound design will transform our hospital soundscapes. Now, this is one area where I see considered UI sound design make a huge difference to people's health and general well-being in a hospital environment. Hospital soundscapes of today, not very calming to say the least, full of piercing and intrusive alarms. I recall when my son was born last summer via emergency C-section. We were sitting in the operating theatre, hearing numerous alarms going off around us. It was really, quite stressful, not what he wanted to hear at that point. A lot of the change will need to come from alarm sound management, which it will. But as medical devices get smarter and have a greater focus on design, we will see a big shift towards really considered UI sound design within hospital environments. I've been working for a company recently involved in this space, so it's an area I'm following very closely right now. Next, I see UI sound design playing an increasing role in branding, providing key branding elements. So as the need for considered UI sound design increases, brands will look at ways to incorporate key UI sounds into their marketing strategies. Brands will need to be very, very careful with this. People don't necessarily want to hear a jingle every time your smart fridge tells you you ran out of milk. So audio branding and how it relates to UI sound is a big topic which needs more discussion I can give here. But one thing I would say, for UI sounds, if you focus on the function and the design, you stand a much better chance of establishing a successful audio brand. Nothing should feel forced. And really, I'd say the audio logos of today, they need to have more meaning beyond being simply a brand recognizer. To give an example of this, I'd like to share something from some of my more recent work, the sound design I created for Wayfinder. So Wayfinder have created the first open standard for audio-based navigation, another rapidly growing area where UI sounds is absolutely key. Highlighted also from my previous work I did a year or so earlier for a similar type of project on the Microsoft Cities Unlocked project. So the aim of Wayfinder is to empower visually impaired people to navigate the world based on a consistent and coherent experience. It's a really fantastic project, so I'd urge you to check it out if you haven't come across it before. So my task was fairly straightforward: create two sounds, a general notification alert, which you'd hear prior to every voice instruction, and then a journey complete alert, whilst I would also establish an audio identity going forwards. So here are those two sounds. So notice how they're very much a coherent pair of UI sounds, as I touched on earlier. The relationship between these two sounds also became a key part of the branding, inspiration, and design DNA, and fed into the overall identity work which was done by the branding agency Moving Brands. The combination of these two sounds also works really nicely as a separate sound, a sound that could be used, for example, as an audio logo, which can be used in certain appropriate situations, such as together with the new logo animation, which was again done by Moving Brands, which I can play for you now. In addition to this sound also has potential for another use as some kind of accreditation sound in the future. For example, you walk into a zone which is supported by Wayfinder, you would hear this sound. So, rather than just adding an audio logo into the saturated world of audio logos, the sounds here, they have real meaning. They're a key part of the user experience. So these days, you will also see UI sounds as part of a marketing campaign. The new Citroen C3 ad, which promotes their smart technology, they use UI sounds throughout the ad. And Google have also regularly used UI sounds throughout their ads to promote their Google Now application. So if you're using UI sounds as part of a massive marketing campaign, then clearly you need to pay a lot of attention to those UI sounds, ensuring they're a really good representation of your brand and design. Okay, finally, and this is really one of the key points I'd like to make with you guys. I think we'll steadily see UI sound design establishing its place in the product design process. Good strides have been made here, which I can tell from my experience at Nokia and Microsoft. But still, UI sound design is generally undervalued. UI sound design should be taken very seriously, just as any other design element is. So you often see these design competencies as part of a typical product design setup. But what about UI sound design? UI sound design needs to be integrated as a recognized design competence. If you don't bring it into the process and instead hash on some UI sound design at the end, everything can fall down. Everything you strive to perfect, from the UX, the UI, interaction, motion, product design, and of course one's feelings towards a brand. For anyone working in design out there, you'll know that the term UX design has become somewhat ubiquitous today. Its meaning is being used a bit too freely, let's say. What's included within the paradigm of UX design can depend on each context. But I think it's telling that not one UX design process I've ever come across has even mentioned UI sound design. I strongly feel this needs to change. One step towards this would be to establish a clear role for the UI sound design competence. I'd call it a UX UI sound designer. You could also maybe think of a like product sound designer or interaction sound designer, but I think this covers it really well. So a UX UI sound designer, they should be integrated as part of UX design. They should therefore work closely with interaction, motion, and UI designers as part of the creative process. UI sound design can then actually help shape the interface design rather than be an add-on at the end. And from this role, the UI sounds should also be tested regularly in usability tests, supported by UX researchers and prototypers. Bring it all together, let sound design into the product design process. Small sounds really do make a big difference. Thank you.